You ever get the feeling you're riding straight into the devil's parlor? That's what it felt like the day I pointed my horse toward Coyote Creek. The wind didn't just blow out there on the Montana border. It had teeth. It tore at your clothes and scraped the dust off the dying land and threw it right in your face. It was a mean wind in a mean place. I wasn't looking for a fight. I swear I wasn't. My plan was simple. Ride in, get some nails for a busted fence, maybe some coffee, and ride out. Keep my head down, my mouth shut, and my hand away from the iron on my hip. But trouble, well, trouble has a way of finding you, don't it? It don't care what your plans are. Coyote Creek wasn't much to look at, just a handful of tired buildings leaning on each other so they didn't fall over. A saloon with busted-out windows, a general store that looked like one good sneeze could knock it flat, and a church with a bell so broken it hadn't rung in a decade. The whole town smelled like cheap whiskey, old sweat, and the kind of desperation that gets into a man's bones and never leaves. It was a place where hope came to die, but it wasn't the smell or the dust that made my gut clench up like a fist. It was what they had tied to the gallows post behind that broken-down church. It was a girl, couldn't have been more than 13, and small for her age, thin as a cornstalk in a drought, with bare feet caked in dirt and wrists tied high above her head. The hemp rope was thick and coarse, and it had already dug angry red welts into her skin. Her hair was a tangled mess of black, but through it I could see her face. Sun-browned skin, hollow cheeks, and a jaw set so hard you could strike a match on it. This wasn't a girl who was ready to quit. This was a girl who didn't know how. A few townsfolk were scattered around, most of them doing a real good job of looking at anything else. The sky, the dirt, their own worn-out boots. But some were watching. Their eyes were cold and quiet, like this was just another Tuesday, justice being served. Then I saw him, leaning against a post by the saloon, a straw sticking out of the corner of his mouth. Tomas Ortega, a hired gun with a lazy smile and eyes that missed nothing. He worked for the man who owned this town, owned the valley, and figured he owned every soul in it. Wyatt Greeley. Sad, ain't it? Ortega called out as my boots hit the dirt. His voice was smooth but with an edge like a rusty knife. Little half-breed brat. Greeley says she's his now. I didn't say anything. I just walked closer. My shadow stretched out long and thin in the harsh morning light. Ortega kept talking, enjoying the sound of his own voice. Her old man ran up a debt bigger than a cattle drive. Then he tucked his tail and ran off, left the girl to pay his tab. I finally looked at him. Tying up children is how you settle debts around here? He just shrugged, that lazy grin never leaving his face. It was the kind of grin that made you want to wipe it off with your knuckles. Ain't my business. Boss says she works it off at one of his camps, or he sells her down to Santa Fe. Makes no difference to me. That's when her eyes lifted. The girls. They found mine across the dusty street. They were gray as a storm cloud and hard as granite. There was no fear in them, no begging, just a fire buried so deep you'd get burned trying to put it out. And in that moment, I knew my plans for a quiet trip had just gone up in smoke. I walked right past Ortega, my hand going to the worn leather pouch tucked in my coat. I stopped in front of the girl. I could see the rope burns up close now, the way her shoulders trembled from holding her own weight for so long. I turned back to Ortega. How much? His grin got wider, showing a row of yellow teeth. He thought it was a game. For her? Boss says $18. It was a fortune, more money than most folks in this town saw in a year. He was expecting me to haggle, to walk away. I didn't do either. I tossed the pouch to him. It landed in his palm with a heavy thud, the weight of gold coins. His eyes went wide for just a second before he caught himself. I'm not buying her, I said, my voice low and even. I'm buying her freedom. Ortega weighed the pouch in his hand, his grin replaced by a look of confusion, then annoyance. He nodded his head toward the ground, where a grimy, dull-bladed knife was stuck in the dirt. Cut her loose, then. But don't go thinking Greeley forgets a debt. Ever. I ignored him. I knelt by the post and pulled the knife from the ground. The rope was thick, but the blade was sharp enough. The fibers hissed as I sawed through them, one by one. Her arms dropped to her sides, limp and useless. She swayed on her feet, but she didn't fall. That jaw was still set like stone. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She had to clear her throat to speak. Her voice was a dry rasp, like it hadn't been used in days. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara May." "You got folks nearby, Clara May?" A slow, deliberate shake of her head. "No." "Come on, then." I helped her over to my mule. She was so light it was like lifting a bundle of sticks. She grabbed onto the saddle horn, her knuckles white, her eyes locked on the ground in front of her. She still hadn't really looked at me. Not yet. We rode out of Coyote Creek slow. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could hear Ortega's laughter start up again, curling through the dusty air like poison smoke. He thought he'd won. He'd gotten his money, and Grayley would get his revenge on me later. But as we left that crooked town behind, I looked at the small, silent girl clinging to my mule. She hadn't said a word, but her eyes were darting back and forth now, scanning the hills, the horizon, the endless, empty prairie. She wasn't just scared. She was watching for something. And I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was a whole lot more dangerous than a hired gun with a lazy smile. The $18 I just spent wasn't the end of a debt. It was just the beginning. The ride away from Coyote Creek was long and quiet. Too quiet. The only sounds were the plodding of hooves on the hard-packed earth and the constant whisper of that mean Montana wind. The sky above us was huge and empty, the kind of sky that makes you feel real small. Clara didn't say a word. She just held on tight, her body stiff, her eyes constantly moving, scanning, searching. It wasn't the aimless look of a scared kid. It was the look of a scout watching for an ambush. I'd seen it before in men twice her age, and it never meant anything good. What in the hell was she looking for? It was nearly sundown when Broken Spur Ranch finally came into view. It wasn't much to look at, just a small, weathered cabin tucked against the side of a limestone ridge. The barn sagged in the middle like an old man's back. The fences were a crooked mess of busted rails and wishful thinking. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and weak, like it was tired of trying. This was my home, my quiet place, the place I'd come to forget the world. Looks like the world had followed me. Clara slid off the mule as soon as I stopped, keeping her distance. Her eyes took in the whole place, the leaning cabin, the busted chicken coop, the general air of decay. She was probably wondering if she'd just traded one prison for another. "It ain't much," I said, unlatching the cabin door. "But it's dry and it's quiet, and nobody ties folks to posts out here." The inside was just as spare, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a cot near the hearth, my own bedroll in the corner. But a pot of beans was simmering on the stove, and the smell, faint as it was, filled the small room. I saw Clara's nose twitch. I saw her swallow hard. "You hungry?" A small, hesitant nod. I ladled a scoop of beans into a tin bowl and slid it across the table. She sat down, her movements stiff and cautious. She held the spoon like it was a live thing that might bite her. She took one bite, then another, faster this time. She ate like a starving wolf, but her eyes never left my face, watching me, waiting for the trick, the catch. When the bowl was clean enough to see her reflection in, she finally spoke. Her voice was still that dry, rough whisper. "You gonna lock me in?" The question hit me harder than a punch. I stopped what I was doing, my hand frozen on the handle of the coffee pot. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the grit and the defiance. I saw the terror she was trying so hard to hide. What had they done to this child? My brow furrowed. "No, no locks here, Clara." She studied my face for a long time, searching for the lie. I guess she didn't find it, because she finally seemed to relax. Just a little. She curled up on the floor by the hearth, pulling her knees to her chest. She was exhausted, I could see it. Sleep was fighting a war with her, but fear was winning. Her eyes stayed wide and watchful in the firelight. I settled into my old rocking chair, the shotgun resting across my lap. I watched the darkness swallow the prairie outside the window. I hadn't ridden into town today planning on saving anyone. I was just a man trying to be left alone. But looking at the bruises on her face, The raw rope burns on her wrists, and that stubborn fire she refused to let anyone put out. I reckon maybe, just maybe, we'd both been saved a little. But as the first coyote howled out in the lonely dark, a cold thought slithered into my mind. Ortega had said her father ran up a debt and then ran off. But what if he didn't run? What if Grayle's men made sure he couldn't? The silence in that cabin was a heavy thing. You could feel the weight of everything unsaid. The first night, Clara barely slept. She was a bundle of nerves coiled by the fire, jumping at every creak of the old cabin, every moan of the wind. A few times her eyes would flutter shut, but then they'd snap open again, wide and wild, scanning the shadows for threats that weren't there. Or maybe they were, and I just couldn't see them yet. Morning came with a sharp, angry cold that found its way through every crack in the walls. I was outside splitting kindling when the cabin door creaked open. Clara stood on the porch, barefoot, her arms wrapped tight around her thin frame. Her eyes weren't on me. They were on the land. She studied the sagging barn, the broken fence line, the empty road stretching off toward the horizon. She was mapping it, learning the terrain, looking for escape routes. "Chickens need feeding," I said, jerking my chin toward the coop. "Corn's in the sack by the door." She hesitated for a beat, then gave a sharp nod and patted across the frosty ground. She moved with a purpose that surprised me. By the time I had a decent stack of wood, she was back, her hands red from the cold, but her face was a mask of concentration. Breakfast was silent. Hard bread, leftover beans, and coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. She barely ate, just cradled the warm mug in her hands. "You can eat," I told her. "There's more." She looked at me, her gray eyes weighing my words. Then she tore off a tiny piece of bread and chewed it slowly, like she was committing the taste to memory in case it was her last. This wasn't just a girl who'd been hungry. This was a girl who'd been starved. On purpose. The day crawled by. I started work on the northern fence line, the one Grayle's land bordered up against. Clara followed me, silent as a ghost. She never offered to help, but she never stood still. She watched everything I did, how I stretched the wire, how I set the posts, how I checked my back every few minutes, my eyes scanning the ridge where trouble was most likely to come from. When she stumbled on a loose rock and skinned her knee, she just bit her lip to stop the cry of pain, wiped the blood on her skirt, and kept walking. I handed her a strip of clean cloth from my saddlebag without a word. She took it without a word. That evening, as the sky burned orange and purple, I found her by the barn. She was crouched down, half hidden, running her hand along the bottom of the heavy wooden door. "What are you doing?" I asked, approaching slowly so I didn't spook her. She jumped but didn't run. Her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Just checking." "Checking for what?" She finally looked up at me, and the look in her eyes was a gut punch. "To see if the door locks from the outside." My jaw tightened. Grilly hadn't just tied her to a post. He'd locked her in dark places, left her there. The cruelty of it made my blood run cold. I crouched down beside her. "It don't," I said, my voice low and rough. "Nothing here does. You can walk out that gate anytime you want." She didn't answer, but that night she slept a little closer to the fire. And when I checked on her in the middle of the night, her breathing was deep and even. For the first time, she was actually asleep. But my own mind was racing. Her father's debt. The way Ortega talked about it, it sounded like a simple gambling problem. But the more I saw of Clara, the less simple any of this seemed. You don't treat a gambler's kid like this. This was personal. This was punishment. The next day, she finally spoke about it. We were sitting by the fire, the wind howling outside. "It wasn't cards," she said out of nowhere. I looked up from the harness I was mending. "What wasn't?" "The debt," she said, staring into the flames. "Papa didn't lose me in a card game. That's just the story Grayley tells." Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "Grayley wanted our land. It's got a spring on it. The only good water for 10 miles. He tried to buy it. Papa said no. He said the land was for me and my brother." My hands stilled. "You have a brother?" A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "His name was Mateo. He was younger than me." She choked on the words. Grayle's men came one night. They said Papa owed them money. They said, they said they were taking the land as payment. And me. Papa tried to fight them. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a horror no child should ever know. Grayle told him he had a choice. Give up the girl or watch them take the boy. He thought he was saving Mateo. My blood ran ice cold. This wasn't about a debt. It was a lie. A cover for a cold-blooded land grab. Grayle hadn't just taken this girl as payment. He'd forced her own father to hand her over, using her little brother as leverage. And the worst part? The question that screamed in my mind? What did he do with the boy? The story she told hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. It wasn't about a gambling debt. It was about pure, rotten evil. Wyatt Grayle didn't just want their land. He wanted to break their family, to grind them into the dirt until nothing was left. He'd made her father choose between his children. An impossible choice. A monster's game. Where's your folks now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her face, which had shown a flicker of pained memory, went hard again. The walls went back up. Mama was taken. Before all this. Grayle. He said she was going to work at his main house. As a maid. She spat the word out like it was poison. We never saw her again. And Papa, after they took me, he just disappeared. Gone. The word was so final. A family erased. A boy used as a weapon. A girl taken as a prize. A mother vanished and a father broken. All for a piece of land with a spring on it. Or was it more than that? Grayle was a man who had everything. Why go to such brutal lengths for one small homestead? It didn't add up. There was a piece of this puzzle I was missing. I leaned back, the old chair groaning under my weight. You ain't property, Clara, I muttered, more to myself than to her. And that land is yours. A flicker of something, not hope, not yet, but something like it, ghosted across her face before she hid it away. She was smart. She knew a man like Grayle didn't just let things go. He didn't forget an $18 insult, and he sure as hell wouldn't forget a prime piece of land he believed was his. Trouble wasn't just coming, it was already on its way, and my little broken-down ranch was standing right in its path. A few days passed. A strange, tense rhythm settled over the place. We worked, we ate, we watched the horizon. Clara started talking more, in short, clipped sentences. She told me about her brother Mateo, how he was quick and clever, how he could find bird nests no one else could see. She never said was. She always said is, as if she was refusing to believe he was gone. She followed me everywhere. When I fixed the roof on the barn, she was there, handing me nails. When I brushed down the horses, she was there, learning how to do it herself. She was a sponge, soaking everything up, but her eyes still had that haunted, watchful look. On the sixth morning, a rider appeared on the eastern ridge. My hand went to the shotgun instantly. I saw Clara freeze by the porch steps, her whole body going rigid. Stay inside, I told her, my voice low. I stepped out onto the porch as the rider got closer. It was Hank Sutter, my nearest neighbor if you could call 10 miles of empty prairie and a mountain ridge near. Hank was a good man, quiet and weathered, the kind of man who kept to himself but would give you the shirt off his back if you truly needed it. He reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his eyes flicking from me to the door where Clara was peeking out. Eli, he said, his voice a low drawl, heard a story in town, said you paid a high price for a stray. My jaw flexed. She ain't a stray, Hank, and it ain't your concern. He sighed, pushing his battered hat back on his head. Ain't saying it is, but word travels fast. And the word is, Wyatt Grayle is spitting mad. He's telling everyone you stole his property. He's got the sheriff polishing the story for him. She ain't property, I said again, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. Hank leaned forward in his saddle. I know that, Eli. You know that. But Grayle spins a good tale, makes himself sound like he's in the right, even when he's acting lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. Folks are scared of him. They'll believe what he tells them to believe. He paused, his gaze turning serious. Just watch your back. He's not going to let this go. He's got men riding, asking questions. Looking for you. Looking for her. With a final troubled nod, he tipped his hat and rode off, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the vast silence. The warning settled over the ranch like a shroud. That night, the wind howled louder than ever. The fire in the hearth seemed to offer less warmth. Clara sat across from me, her small hands wrapped around a cup of chicory. "He'll come, won't he?" she asked, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I didn't lie to her. "Yeah, he'll come." She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. I thought that was the end of it. But then she looked up at me, her gray eyes burning with an intensity that startled me. "It's not just the land," she whispered. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Before they took my mother, she was digging. Out by the old creek bed on our property. She found something. She hid it. She told me never to tell Papa, and never ever to tell anyone from the town." My heart started beating a little faster. "What was it, Clara? What did she find?" Clara shook her head, her eyes wide with a fear that was deeper than anything I had seen in her yet. "I don't know," she breathed, "but it was in a small, heavy leather box. And the night Grelly's men took her, it wasn't our house they searched. They went straight for the creek bed. They tore the whole place up." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The cruelty, the elaborate lie about the debt, the obsession. Wyatt Grayley didn't just want the land. He wanted what was buried under it. And he thought Clara's family knew where it was. He didn't think Clara was property. He thought she was a key. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't a fight over a girl's freedom anymore. It was a race, a hunt for a secret buried in the dirt, a secret Grayley was willing to kill for. And now he thought I had the map. The next few days were a blur of work and waiting. Every shadow on the ridge looked like one of Grayley's men. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching horses. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy with threat. I tried to get more out of Clara about the box her mother found, but she clammed up tight. It was a secret her mother had given her to protect, and she was going to protect it, even from me. I didn't push. The girl had lost everything. A secret was about all she had left to her name. Instead, I taught her things. Not just chores, but things that mattered out here. How to read animal tracks in the dirt. How to tell which clouds carried rain and which were just empty promises. I took her out behind the barn and showed her how to hold the shotgun, how to brace it against her shoulder, how to line up the sight. Her shoulder was bruised after the first kick, but she just gritted her teeth and said, "Again." There was a core of steel in that girl that Grayley had forged himself with his own cruelty. He was creating the very weapon that might one day be used against him. One afternoon, she led me to a small, quiet spot behind the cabin. There was a single unmarked gravestone there, with a few stubborn wildflowers growing around it. The resting place of my late wife, Margaret. Clara stood there for a long time, her head bowed. "You miss her?" she asked softly. I crouched down, running my hand over the weathered stone. "Every damn day. I had a brother once," she said, her voice catching. "Mateo. Grayley took him." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. You think he's still alive?" I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to give her that hope. But I'd seen what men like Grayley did to loose ends. I put a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know, Clara, but if there's a chance, we'll find him." It was a promise I had no idea how to keep. Later that night, as a storm rolled in from the mountains, drumming its fingers on our tin roof, the knock came. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was hard and sharp and didn't plan on waiting for an answer. My shotgun was in my hands before the second rap hit the door. Clara scrambled back from the hearth, her face pale in the firelight. "Get in the corner," I whispered, "and stay down." I cracked the door open just enough to see out. Rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the world into a mess of gray and black. There were two men on horseback, slickers hiding their faces. But I recognized the horses, Grayley's stock. "We're looking for a girl," one of them shouted over the storm. "Half-breed, stolen from Coyote Creek. The sheriff sent us." The lie was so bald it was almost funny. The sheriff didn't send people out in a storm like this unless Grayley was holding his leash. "No girl here," I shouted back. "You've got the wrong ranch." The man laughed, a nasty wet sound. We don't think so, Turner. Grayley says you got something that belongs to him. He wants it back, the girl, and anything she might have told you. So that was it. They knew about the secret, or at least they suspected. You tell Grayley to come ask me himself, I yelled, my thumb resting on the hammer of the shotgun. Oh, he'll be coming, the other man called. This was just a friendly visit, to let you know there's nowhere to run. He paused, letting the threat hang in the wet air. And to give you this. He reached into his saddlebag and threw something toward the porch. It landed with a soft, sickening thud in the mud just a few feet from my door. They turned their horses and vanished back into the storm as quickly as they appeared. My heart pounded in my chest. I waited until the sound of their hooves was completely swallowed by the rain. Then I slowly opened the door wider. Clara was right behind me, peering around my legs. What is it? She whispered. What did they throw? I stepped out onto the porch, the cold rain soaking my shirt. I knelt in the mud, my stomach twisting into a knot of pure dread. It was a small bundle, wrapped in oilcloth. My fingers trembled as I untied the string. Inside, nestled in the cloth, was a child's worn leather shoe. It was small, too small for Clara, and tucked inside the shoe was a single, freshly cut lock of dark, curly hair. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her whisper was a ragged, broken sound. Mateo. Grayley hadn't just taken the boy. He was still alive, and Grayley was using him. He wasn't just a loose end. He was a hostage. He wasn't just hunting Clara for what she might know. He was telling us, in the cruelest way imaginable, that he held the other key, and he would turn it whenever he pleased. The little shoe sat on the rough-hewn table between us, a silent, terrible testament to Wyatt Grayley's cruelty. The lock of hair lay beside it, a dark curl against the pale wood. Clara couldn't take her eyes off it. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise of what Grayley was capable of and what he would do to get what he wanted. Mateo was alive. That was the spark of hope. But he was in the hands of a monster. That was the nightmare. He's using him, I said, my voice as cold and hard as I could make it. He's using your brother to control you, to make you talk. Clara looked up from the shoe, her face a mess of grief and rage. For the first time, the stone wall she'd built around herself crumbled completely. Sobs racked her small body, deep, painful sounds that came from a place of unimaginable loss. I moved to comfort her, but she held up a hand, shaking her head. The sobbing stopped as quickly as it started. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. When she looked at me again, the fire in her eyes was burning hotter than ever before. The fear was gone, replaced by something else, something harder. My mother, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She's alive too. I stared at her. Clara, you told me Grayley's men took her, that you never saw her again. That's what I thought, she said, her words coming in a rush. That's what everyone thought. But a week before they came for me, a traveler passed through, an old trapper. He gave me this. She reached into the collar of her worn dress and pulled out a thin leather cord. On the end of it was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He said a woman gave it to him, up near Red Rock Crossing. He said she told him to give it to the girl at the Delgado place. She said it meant, I am safe. I am waiting. She clutched the bird so tightly her knuckles went white. It was my mother's. She carved these for us when we were little. It's her sign. My mind was reeling. The mother, Rosalia, was alive and in hiding. The son, Mateo, was Grayley's prisoner. The daughter, Clara, was here with me. And Grayley was tearing the world apart looking for a secret only the mother might know. Red Rock Crossing. It was bad country, outlaw country, a place where the law didn't go and folks went to disappear. It made sense. If you wanted to hide from a man like Wyatt Grayley, you went where even he would be hesitant to follow. He thinks I know where the box is, Clara whispered. He thinks my mother told me before they took her. But she didn't. She only told me to run if anything ever happened. To run and never look back. But you know where she is, I said. Red Rock Crossing. She nodded. I think so. The plan formed in my mind, desperate and dangerous. We couldn't wait for Grayley to come to us. We couldn't hide behind a broken-down fence and a shotgun. He held all the cards. He had Mateo. But we had something he didn't. We knew where Rosalia was. If we could get to her, if we could find out what was in that box, we might finally have something to fight back with. A weapon, a piece of leverage, something to trade for Mateo's life. Pack what you can carry, I said, standing up. My mind was made up. We're leaving? Tonight. Leaving? Clara looked around the small, sparse cabin. It wasn't much, but for a few days it had been a safe harbor in a storm. Where are we going? We're not running, I told her, checking the loads in my rifle. We're hunting. We're going to Red Rock Crossing. We're going to find your mother. We rode out under the cover of a moonless sky, leaving the smoldering fire in the hearth behind. We pushed the horses hard, heading southeast into the wild, unforgiving land that separated the settled valleys from the lawless canyons. Every sound made me jump. Every coyote howl sounded like one of Grayley's men. We were riding into the lion's den, with no idea if we'd make it out alive. But as we crested the first ridge, I glanced over at Clara. She rode straight-backed, her face set, the little wooden bird clutched in her hand. She wasn't the same girl I'd cut down from that post a week ago. That girl was a victim, waiting for the end. This girl, the one riding into the dark beside me, she was a survivor, and she was ready for a war. The journey to Red Rock Crossing was 2 days of hell. The land got meaner with every mile. The rolling prairies gave way to jagged hills and canyons that looked like scars on the face of the earth. This was country that didn't want people in it. It was a place of rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and men who were more dangerous than either. We spoke little. We didn't dare light a fire at night, eating cold jerky and hardtack in the dark, taking turns on watch. I saw Clara's exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, but she never complained. Not once. She just chewed her food, cleaned her rifle when I showed her how, and kept her eyes on the trail ahead. She was watching me too, learning. I saw her mimicking the way I scanned the horizon, the way I tested the wind. She was shedding the skin of a frightened child and growing into something else, something forged in fire and fear. We reached the edge of the canyons on the third day. The rocks around us glowed a deep blood red in the setting sun. This was it. Red Rock Crossing, a maze of stone and shadow, a perfect place to hide, or a perfect place to get cornered and die. What now? Clara asked, her voice a dry whisper. Now we find her, I said, though I had no idea how. The place was a fortress of natural stone. She could be anywhere. But Clara pointed. Her eyes were sharper than mine. Smoke! I followed her gaze. There, tucked away in a deep crevice near the churning river below, was the thinnest, faintest wisp of smoke, barely visible against the dark red rock. It was a careful fire, the kind you light when you need warmth but don't want company. We tied the horses and made our way down on foot, moving slow and quiet. My rifle ready. As we got closer, I could smell roasting meat. A rabbit, maybe. A figure stepped out from behind a massive boulder, a rifle in her hands. The woman was lean and weathered, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face a mask of hardship and suspicion. But her eyes, they were the same stormy gray as her daughter's. Rosalia Delgado. She froze, her rifle half raised, her gaze locked on Clara. It was a look of pure, heart-stopping disbelief. For a second that stretched into an eternity, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The only sound was the rush of the river below. Mama? Clara's voice was a choked, broken thing. Rosalia stumbled forward, the rifle forgotten, her hands trembling. She pulled Clara into a fierce, desperate hug, burying her face in her daughter's tangled hair. Her shoulders shook with sobs she didn't let make a sound. She was clutching her daughter as if she was a ghost she was afraid would fade away. I stood back, keeping watch on the trail above. This was their moment. When Rosalia finally pulled back, she held Clara at arm's length, her hands framing her daughter's face, her eyes drinking in every detail. They told me you were gone, she rasped, her voice thick with emotion. Grayley's men. They said they sold you. I got away, Clara said, her voice unsteady. She glanced back at me. He helped. Rosalia's eyes met mine over Clara's head. There was gratitude there, but it was buried under a thick layer of mistrust and weariness. This was a woman who had learned the hard way that help always came with a price. "You're a friend?" she asked, her voice low and guarded. I nodded. "Name's Turner. We don't have much time. Grayle's looking for her, for both of you. He sent a message. He has Mateo." The name hit her like a physical blow. The small bit of color that had returned to her face drained away, leaving it a sickly gray. "Mateo?" she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, they said—" "They lied," I said grimly. "He's alive. Grayle's holding him. He's using him to try and make Clara talk." Rosalia's grief turned to stone-cold fury. The name Grayle came from her lips like a curse. That devil, he took everything. My home, my husband. She looked from me to Clara, her eyes wild with a desperate, terrible question. "Talk? Talk about what?" The moment of truth. "The box, Mama," Clara said softly. "The one you found in the creek bed. That's what he wants. He's been looking for it all this time." Rosalia's face hardened. She looked around, at the canyon walls closing in on them, at the endless, empty sky. Her shoulders squared. The broken, grieving mother disappeared, and in her place was a warrior. "I'm done running," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. She turned to me. "This secret dies with me, or it ends with him. There is no other way." "Then we make our stand," I said. She shook her head. "Not here. This is a place to hide, not to fight. We go back." I stared at her. "Back? Back to Broken Spur. My ranch is the first place he'll look." "No," Rosalia said, a strange, fierce light in her eyes. "Not your ranch, ours. He stole our land, but he doesn't know its secrets. The caves under the creek bed. The box is not the only thing hidden there." She looked at Clara, then at me, her decision made. "He wants a war, Turner? Then we will give him one. On our own ground." A new, terrifying thought dawned on me. We weren't just going back to fight. We were going back to set a trap. And with Grayle holding Mateo, we were walking into a trap of our own. The ride back was 1,000 times worse than the ride out. We weren't just running from a threat anymore. We were riding toward it. Rosalia was a woman transformed. The fear and grief were still there, etched on her face. But they were banked embers beneath a fire of pure, cold rage. She knew the land like the back of her own hand, leading us through hidden game trails and dry creek beds that cut our travel time in half. She told us the story of the box. Her grandfather, a proud Mexican man who refused to bend the knee when the Americans came and drew new lines on old maps, had been a prospector. He'd found a rich vein of gold, high in the Gallatin Mountains. Not a placer claim you could pan from a river, but a deep, solid lode of pure ore, enough to make a man a king. He knew what would happen if word got out. He'd be driven off, maybe killed. The land would be stolen. So he kept it a secret. He mined it in secret, slowly, carefully, storing the raw, unprocessed ore in a heavy iron-strapped box. The map, the deed to the claim, everything was in that box. He'd buried it on their land, telling only his daughter Rosalia's mother of its location. It was the family's legacy, their security, their secret. "Grayle must have heard the rumors," Rosalia said, her voice tight as she urged her horse up a steep incline. "Old stories. He started sniffing around years ago, trying to buy up the land. When my husband refused to sell, he manufactured the debt. It was all a lie to get his hands on our home, to tear it apart until he found what he was looking for. It all made sense now. The obsession, the cruelty. It was never about a spring or a few acres of grazing land. It was about a fortune. Grayle didn't want to be a cattle baron. He wanted to be an emperor." As we got closer to my ranch, a column of smoke on the horizon made my blood run cold. It was in the wrong place. It was too thick, too dark. "No," I whispered, kicking my horse into a gallop. Clara and Rosalia were right behind me. We crested the final ridge and pulled up short, my heart sinking into my boots. Broken Spur Ranch was gone. The barn was a blackened, skeletal ruin, still smoldering. The fences were hacked to pieces. My cabin, the roof was caved in, the windows were shattered, and ugly black scorch marks licked up the walls. They hadn't just searched it. They had tried to burn it to the ground, and scrawled across what was left of my front door, in what looked like black tar, was a single word. Thief. Clara slid off her horse, her face a mask of disbelief. Rosalia's hand flew to her mouth, a stifled cry escaping her lips. They thought they had lost their last safe place in the world. But I wasn't looking at the wreckage. I was looking at the ground. Boot prints. Lots of them. 3, maybe 4 sets of men. They'd been careless, confident, and one of the prints had a distinct drag to it, a man with a limp. Caleb Dawes, I muttered. Grayle's foreman, a man whose cruelty was second only to his bosses. The message was brutally clear. This wasn't a warning anymore. They weren't just looking for us. They were trying to erase us, to burn away any trace that we had ever existed. But they'd made a mistake. They thought by destroying my home, they were leaving us with nowhere to go. They didn't know we had a destination. They didn't know we were heading for a place they'd already stolen, a place filled with secrets they'd never find. Rosalia looked at the ruins of my life, then looked at me. There was no pity in her eyes, only shared resolve. He has left us with nothing to lose, she said, her voice quiet but strong. No, I said, turning my horse away from the smoldering barn and toward the Delgado homestead. He just gave us a reason to burn his whole world down. We left the ruins of Broken Spur behind without a backward glance. There was nothing for us there now but ash and bad memories. We rode hard, pushing through the last few miles of open country as dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The Delgado homestead was tucked into a small box canyon, hidden from the main trail. From a distance it looked abandoned, desolate. The small adobe house was silent, the windows dark and empty like vacant eyes. The corral was broken, the fields fallow. This was the place Grayley had torn apart, the place he had bled dry, but Rosalia knew better. He thinks this place is dead, she whispered as we dismounted in a thicket of cottonwood trees. He searched it, found nothing, and left it to rot. He would never think we'd come back here. She led us not to the house, but to the dry creek bed that ran along the edge of the property. The banks were steep and overgrown. To anyone else, it was just a ditch. To Rosalia, it was a hidden road. We followed her down into the darkness of the wash, the horses picking their way carefully over the loose stones. After 100 yards, she stopped. She ran her hand along the dirt wall of the creek bed, feeling for something. Then she pulled aside a thick curtain of old gnarled roots, revealing a dark, narrow opening, a cave. My grandfather used these caves to hide from the Comanches, she said, her voice echoing in the enclosed space. They run for miles under this land. Grayley and his men could search for 100 years and never find them all. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth. It was pitch black. Rosalia struck a match, the sudden flare of light revealing a small lantern she had stashed just inside the entrance. As the warm light pushed back the oppressive darkness, I could see the cave was larger than it looked, branching off into multiple tunnels. This was her ground, her fortress. The box is in the deep tunnels, she said, looking at Clara. But first, we prepare. For the next hour we worked. Rosalia seemed to know every nook and cranny of this underground world. From hidden caches, she produced blankets, tins of food, canteens of water, and to my surprise, 2 more rifles and several boxes of ammunition. Her husband had been preparing for a siege that he never got to fight. As we worked, a new sound reached us from outside. Faint at first, but growing steadily louder. Hoofbeats, a lot of them. My blood went cold. They followed us. Rosalia shook her head, a grim smile on her face. No, they did not follow us. They came back to finish the job. She crept to the entrance and peered through the curtain of roots. Her body went still. What is it? I whispered, moving up behind her. I looked out. In the pale moonlight, I could see them. At least a dozen riders, surrounding the small adobe house. In the lead was Grayley himself, a dark silhouette on a powerful horse, and with him was Caleb Dawes, his limp more pronounced as he dismounted. But it wasn't just them. They had a wagon, and in the back of the wagon was a wooden cage, and inside the cage was a small, terrified boy, Mateo. They'd brought him here. They were using him as bait. Grayle's voice boomed across the silent canyon, cold and clear. Rosalia, I know you can hear me. I know you came back. You have something that belongs to me. Send the girl out with it, or the boy pays the price for your foolishness. Clara let out a strangled cry, and Rosalia pulled her back from the entrance, her hand clamped over her daughter's mouth. This was his plan. He had burned my ranch to flush us out, knowing we had few places to go. He must have had a man watching the old Delgado place just in case. He had anticipated our move. He had us pinned down. But he still didn't know about the caves. That was our only advantage. He'll kill him, Clara sobbed into her mother's hands. Mama, he'll kill Mateo. No, Rosalia said, her voice a fierce, guttural whisper. Her eyes, gleaming in the lantern light, were terrible to behold. No, he will not. Tonight this ends. Tonight he pays for what he did to my husband, for what he did to my children. She looked at me, her face a mask of iron will. Turner, you are a good shot. Can you hit a man from this distance, in this light? I peered through the roots again. It was over 100 yards. The moon was a sliver. It was a hell of a shot. Maybe, but there are too many of them. The second I fire, they'll pepper this bank with so much lead we'll never get out. You will not fire at them, she said, her meaning slowly dawning on me. You will fire at him, only him. She turned and grabbed one of the lanterns. Clara, come with me. You know the tunnels. Turner, you will wait for my signal. What signal? I demanded. She looked back, her eyes burning with a righteous, terrifying fire. You'll know it when you see it. And with that, she and Clara disappeared into the blackness of a side tunnel, leaving me alone at the mouth of the cave, with a dozen killers outside and a nightmare unfolding in the moonlight. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Outside, Grayley was getting impatient. He barked orders. Two of his men dragged Mateo from the cage, kicking and struggling, and threw him to the ground in front of the house. Caleb Dawes stood over him, a pistol in his hand. Last chance, Rosalia, Grayley bellowed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The box, or the boy's blood is on your hands. My rifle was pressed against my shoulder, the stock smooth and cold against my cheek. I had a clear shot at Grayley. I could end the head of the snake right now, but his men would tear Mateo apart before I could even chamber another round. I was trapped, forced to watch. Then I saw it, a flicker of light. Far to the left, up near the ridge that formed the northern wall of the canyon, a single lantern appearing and disappearing as it moved behind the rocks. It was Rosalia. She and Clara had used the tunnels to circle around Grayley's men, coming up behind them. What was her plan? Grayley saw it too. He and his men turned, confused, their rifles half raised toward the mysterious light. It was the distraction she'd promised. But a distraction for what? Then a second light appeared, this one on the right, near the collapsed part of the old corral. Now Grayley's men were really spooked, spinning around, unsure of where the threat was coming from. They were surrounded by two little lights in a great big darkness, and their confidence was starting to crack. It's a trick, Caleb Dawes yelled, his voice tight with nerves. They're trying to split us up. Hold your ground. But it was too late. While all eyes were on the dancing lights, a small, shadowy figure darted from behind the adobe house. Clara. She moved like a phantom, low to the ground, a knife clutched in her hand. She wasn't going for the men. She was going for the horses. With quick, vicious slashes, she cut the reins of the nearest half-dozen mounts, which whinnied and scattered in a panic. Chaos erupted. Grayley's men shouted, some chasing the horses, others firing wildly at the lights on the ridges. It was brilliant. Rosalia hadn't created a distraction. She'd created a whirlwind of confusion and fear, and in that whirlwind, she'd given me my chance. All eyes were off Mateo. He was on the ground, forgotten for a crucial second. Even Caleb Dawes was looking toward the panicked horses. My moment. I didn't aim for Grayley. I aimed for the man closest to the boy. The rifle kicked against my shoulder, the shot cracking through the canyon, unnaturally loud in the sudden chaos. The man crumpled. Before anyone could react, I fired again. Another man went down. They're in the creek bed, someone screamed. Bullets started thudding into the dirt bank around me, splintering the roots that hid my position. But Rosalia's plan was still in motion. From the ridge, A rifle shot rang out, one of the weapons she'd taken with her. One of Grayle's men, who had been drawing a bead on my position, spun around and fell. She was providing cover fire. It was now or never. "Mateo, run!" I roared, my voice raw. "Run for the creek!" The boy scrambled to his feet and sprinted for the darkness of the wash, for the sound of my voice. Caleb Dawes turned, his face a mask of fury, and leveled his pistol at the boy's back. I didn't have a clear shot, but Clara did. She launched herself out of the shadows, no longer a phantom, but a fury. She slammed into Dawes' legs, not with enough force to knock him down, but enough to spoil his aim. His shot went wide, kicking up dirt harmlessly. He cursed and kicked her away, but it was too late. Mateo dove into the creek bed and scrambled toward the cave entrance. I pulled him inside just as a volley of bullets tore through the space where he'd been. He was trembling, crying, but he was alive. He was safe. Outside, the battle was turning. With half their horses gone and their numbers dwindling, Grayle's men were losing their nerve. They were firing blindly now at shadows and ghosts. Then Grayle's voice cut through the gunfire, filled with a rage that was almost inhuman. "Fine. Burn it. Burn it all to the ground." I saw the flicker of a torch. One of his men was running for the old dry barn next to the house. The barn where Rosalia had told me her husband had stored his tools, and several kegs of black powder for clearing rock. This wasn't just a fight anymore. Grayle was about to blow the whole canyon sky high. "Get back! Get deep in the tunnel!" I screamed at the children, shoving them behind me. The torch sailed through the air in a perfect arc, landing in the dry hay piled against the ancient barn wall. The fire caught instantly, a hungry orange flower that bloomed in the darkness. It raced up the dry timbers, painting the canyon in a terrifying, flickering light. Grayle and his remaining men were retreating, using the growing inferno as cover. They were pulling back to the mouth of the canyon, intending to seal us in, to let the fire and the explosion be our tomb. Rosalia, still up on the ridge, saw what was happening. Her rifle cracked one last time, and another of Grayle's men fell, but it was too late to stop the fire. She scrambled down the rocks, racing toward the creek bed, toward us. Inside the cave, Mateo clung to Clara, both of them staring with wide, terrified eyes as the roar of the fire grew louder, the heat becoming a physical presence. We were trapped, pinned down in the cave, with an army of killers at one end of the canyon and a massive bomb at the other. "The back tunnels!" Rosalia yelled, appearing at the mouth of the cave, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wild. "There's another way out. It comes out on the far side of the ridge." We plunged into the darkness, Rosalia leading the way with the lantern. The tunnels were a confusing maze, twisting and turning. Behind us, we could hear the roar of the fire, feel the vibrations through the stone. Any second now, that powder would go. We ran, stumbling over loose rocks, the single lantern casting our long, dancing shadows against the ancient walls. It felt like we were running through the guts of the earth itself. "Here!" Rosalia yelled, stopping at a narrow fissure in the rock, a faint sliver of moonlight visible at the top. "This is it! Go! Climb!" I pushed the children up first, Clara, then Mateo. They scrambled up the rock face like spiders. Rosalia was right behind them. I was last, my hand on her boot, pushing her up. We spilled out onto the cool night air on the far side of the ridge, gasping for breath, our lungs burning. Below us, the canyon was in vision of hell. The barn was a roaring pillar of flame. And then it happened. A deafening, ground-shaking roar. A flash of white light that bleached the color from the world for a heartbeat. The entire barn, the house, everything, disappeared in a cloud of fire and splinters. The shock wave hit us like a giant's fist, knocking us flat, the sound echoing off the mountains for what felt like an eternity. We lay there, stunned, our ears ringing, as flaming debris rained down from the sky. When the world stopped shaking, I pushed myself up. Grayle was gone. His men were gone. The Delgado homestead was a smoking crater. Everything was gone, except us. We were alive, bruised, battered, and deafened, but alive. The four of us, a broken, makeshift family, huddled together on a ridge, watching the embers of our war die out in the darkness. Rosalia finally spoke, her voice a hoarse whisper in the sudden, ringing silence. The box. It was still down there, buried deep in a tunnel beneath the inferno. The secret Grayley had killed for, the fortune that had cost her family everything, was likely lost forever, sealed under tons of collapsed rock. Clara looked at her mother, then at her brother, who was clinging to her as if he'd never let go. She reached out and took her mother's hand. "It doesn't matter, Mama," she said, her voice clear and strong despite everything. "We have each other. We're all that's left." And looking at them, at this family that had been torn apart and forged back together in violence and fire, I knew she was right. Grelly had lost. He hadn't gotten the secret, and in the process he'd lost more than half his men. He was wounded, badly, but he wasn't dead, and a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. Our war wasn't over, but we had won the battle, and for the first time, we had something more valuable than gold to fight for. We had a future. In the cold, gray light of dawn, the devastation was absolute. The canyon was a blackened, smoking wound in the earth. The air was thick with the stench of burnt wood and shattered rock. Wyatt Grayley and his men were long gone, leaving behind nothing but ruin and the bodies of their own dead. We were alive, but we had nothing. No home, no supplies. The entrance to the caves was buried under a mountain of rubble. The box, and the fortune it held, was lost. "What do we do now?" Rosalia asked, her voice hollow. She held Mateo close, her fight from the night before replaced by the weary despair of a refugee. I looked at Clara. She was staring at the destruction, but her face wasn't broken. It was hard, determined. She had found her brother. She had stood up to the monster. She would not be beaten now. "First we survive," I said. "Then we finish this." We spent the next week living like ghosts in the high country. I taught them how to hunt, how to find clean water, how to make shelters from pine boughs. Rosalia, who had grown up in this land, knew the edible plants, the roots that could sustain them. The children, Clara and Mateo, learned fast. The hardship seemed to strip away their fear, leaving something stronger in its place. They were a family again, and they were drawing strength from each other. But we all knew we couldn't live like this forever. Grayley was still out there. Wounded, yes. Humiliated, certainly. But a man like that doesn't just give up. He would be rebuilding. He would be hunting us. One evening, as we sat around a small, smokeless fire, a figure emerged from the twilight. It was Hank Sutter. He had a pack mule loaded with supplies. "Figured you folks might be up here," he said, his face grim. "The whole valley's buzzing. Grayley's telling everyone a band of outlaws attacked his men, blew up the old Delgado place. He's got the sheriff organizing a posse." "He's twisting the story," I said, though I wasn't surprised. "He ain't just twisting it, Eli," Hank said, handing me a sack of flour. "He's using it. He's declared martial law in Coyote Creek. He's got armed guards on every road. He's choking the life out of the valley looking for you. He's offering a huge reward, $500. Dead or alive." The news was a gut punch. Grelly wasn't just hunting us. He was turning our neighbors against us. He was making us the villains. But then Hank said something that changed everything. "He's scared, Eli. I've known Wyatt Grayley for 20 years. I've never seen him scared before. That explosion, it did more than just take out a few of his men. You took something from him, his power. People are starting to whisper. They're starting to wonder if the king of the valley can bleed after all." He looked at Rosalia, at the children. "Folks are remembering the families Grayley pushed out, the men who disappeared. They're scared to talk, but they're thinking it." An idea began to form in my mind. A wild, desperate idea. We couldn't outgun Grayley. We couldn't outrun him. But maybe, just maybe, we could outsmart him. "The box is gone," I said to Rosalia after Hank had left. "But the story isn't. Grayley's power comes from fear, and from the lie that he is the law. If we can prove what he is, if we can show people the truth, his empire will crumble." Over the next few days, we put the plan in motion. Hank was our messenger, our connection to the valley. He rode from ranch to ranch, not talking about us, but asking quiet questions, talking about the old days, reminding people of the things Grayley had done, planting seeds of doubt. Meanwhile, Clara, who had a memory as sharp as a newly honed blade, wrote it all down. Every detail of what had happened to her family, the stolen land, the manufactured debt, the kidnapping of her mother and brother, the attack on my ranch, the final battle in the canyon. It was a testament, a story of Grayle's crimes written in a child's steady hand. We made copies, dozens of them. The final piece of the plan was the most dangerous. We had to get back into Coyote Creek. We had to face the devil in his own parlor. The day we rode down from the mountains, the whole valley seemed to be holding its breath. It wasn't just the four of us. Hank Sutter rode with us, and behind him were a dozen other ranchers, men who had finally had enough of living under Grayle's boot. They were quiet, grim-faced, armed. They weren't a posse. They were an army of ghosts come back to haunt the man who had wronged them. We didn't ride to the saloon. We rode to the church, the one with the broken bell. Wyatt Greeley and his men were there waiting for us. Caleb Dawes at his side, the crooked sheriff behind him. They were expecting a fight. They had their hands on their guns. But we didn't draw. I dismounted, walked to the church doors, and nailed Clara's story to the wood for all to see. Then Rosalia stepped forward. Her voice, clear and strong, rang out across the dusty street. She told her story. She named the men Grayle had cheated, the families he had destroyed. With every name she spoke, one of the ranchers behind me would step forward, a silent confirmation. The townsfolk who had been hiding in their homes began to creep out. They saw the ranchers. They saw the Delgado family, alive, standing defiant. They read the story on the church door. The whispers started. The foundation of fear Grayle had built his kingdom on began to crack. "Lies!" Grayle roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "These are the words of thieves and murderers. Seize them!" The sheriff took a step forward, but his hand was shaking. He looked at the dozen armed ranchers behind me. He looked at the growing crowd of angry townsfolk. He looked at Grayle, and for the first time he saw not a powerful man, but a desperate one. He didn't move. Caleb Dawes, ever the loyal dog, drew his pistol. "I said seize them!" But before he could fire, a single shot rang out. Not from my gun or from the ranchers. It came from the crowd. Caleb Dawes staggered, a look of shock on his face before collapsing into the dirt. An old man, whose son had disappeared after a dispute with Grayle years ago, lowered a smoking pistol. It was over. The dam of fear had broken. Grayle stood alone. His power, his men, his lies, all gone. He looked at me, at Rosalia, at the faces of the people he had terrorized for years. There was no fight left in him, only the empty, hollow eyes of a king who had lost his kingdom. He turned and ran. He didn't get far. The people of Coyote Creek, the ones who had been too afraid to even look at a girl tied to a post, stopped him. They didn't use guns. They just stood in his way. A silent, unmovable wall of quiet, everyday people who had finally found their courage. The law, what was left of it, took him away. The stories came out. The bodies were found. The full, rotten truth of Wyatt Grayle's reign was laid bare for all to see. Months later, the town was different. The bell in the church was fixed. People walked with their heads held high. Broken Spur Ranch was rebuilt, not just by me, but by our neighbors. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was ours. Rosalia, Clara, and Mateo took back their land. They never found the gold, but they found something better. They found their future. Clara, the girl I found broken and tied to a post, was now one of the strongest people I knew. She wore her scars not as a sign of what she had lost, but as a testament to the fact that she had survived. Sometimes, as standing on my porch, watching the sun set over the valley, I think about that mean wind that blew through Coyote Creek. It still blows, but it doesn't feel as mean anymore. Maybe because we learned that the only thing strong enough to stand against a wind like that is people, standing together. This story is a reminder that even in the darkest of places, against the most powerful evil, courage is a fire that can burn down a kingdom. It proves that you don't need a fortune in gold to be rich. Sometimes all you need is family, freedom, and the guts to fight for what's right. If you enjoyed this story, and if you believe in the power of standing up against the bullies of the world, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for listening.